Good evening. I'd like to call into session the Personnel Committee of the Germantown School District. Today is Monday, January 20th, and it is 5:30 p.m. We'll start today's session with a couple PSA announcements. First and foremost, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, happy Inauguration Day, and in case you haven't heard, students and teachers and aides are not to report to school tomorrow. And with that, we'll start with roll call. Higginbotham.
Here.
Pollock.
Here.
Brown, here. Next order of business is agenda revisions and approval. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to approve the agenda revisions and approval.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, that carries. Next order of business will be approval
Gotta
of the
vote.
minutes. Let's vote on that.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, aye.
Any opposed?
Nope. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. We'll move to approval of the December 9th, 2024 meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve the December 9th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Second. Second.
First and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries. And we'll move right into reports and updates and start with support staff compensation study that Mr. Nowak has been working on, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We are at the point in our support staff compensation and benefits study where we have concluded focus groups. We met with 4 groups: food service, custodial maintenance, aides, and administrative assistants beginning, I think the first one was January 9th, and then we ended midweek last week with the final group. And the questions that were posed to them are presented to you in your background, as well as there are links to the feedback that was provided. Having done this last year, the feel of it was a little bit different when we did it with teachers, because teachers are such a big group. We broke them into experience bands in terms of the number of years that they have been in the district. With these groups, there aren't enough employees for that, so there's just representation from the groups. I listed the the staff members who participated. Questions were posed, the same questions to each group. And the process is really to record feedback. There's some follow-up to provide clarification on questions, and some follow-up to kind of build on maybe responses that were given. But for the most part, it's not an activity that involves a significant level of dialogue from myself and the participants. Rather, it's them sharing their feedback and me getting it down. So the feedback that you see, the responses that you see are really, for the most part, what was provided. I also indicated some general themes that exist based on what we heard. The things that I listed just in very as an overview were overtime and comp time practices, modification of PTO or paid time off, recognition of longevity, the discussion of retirement benefits and insurance, the recognition of skills and certifications that employees may have, compensation comparable to negotiating to neighboring districts, compensation of new employees, and then the need for professional development. In general, I would say time came up more than anticipated. And it probably was the dominant theme across all the groups. Time being a couple things. One, time off and time off practices that we have in place, and the desire to potentially have more time. For example, like vacation practices or personal days, and those kinds of things. And then the other way that time came up was relative to things like overtime practices or comp time practices. So, we discussed it. It was they provided their feedback of examples and things like that. All of these things were themes that arose. Our process will be, as an administrative team, to digest this feedback and arrive at possibilities for modification. And that will require looking budgetarily at what we can do and sustain, put together some possibilities, and as a group arrive at a direction that we want to take. When we did this last year, we really didn't know what we were getting into, but the process really worked itself out as we kind of learned from a budget side what we were capable of. Our immediate response was, this is going to be difficult. How are we going to make meaningful change? But the more we worked through it, the more we kind of asked ourselves questions and looked at possibilities, we arrived at, in the case of last year, some meaningful change. And our hope is the same thing will happen this year. I don't know, Dr. Reuter, you want to anything to share?
Very good.
Yeah.
Good. So the next step is you're going to take all this data, reach out to other school districts compared to what they're seeing.
Yeah, well, we've done the reaching out to others, but now it's a matter of sitting at a table collectively and just, again, trying to arrive at some possibilities, generate some ideas of things that we can do. And the challenge that we have here now is really the timeline of budget. So, and relative to, not that teachers play a huge role in this, but they always do relative to budget and staffing. So, we in the next probably 4 to 6 weeks will need to be in a place where we're on the same page with our business department relative to what the budget can support. So, and we have time to do that. This is exactly where we were last year at this time. So
Right on
the
schedule.
next step will be kind of putting our creative minds to work around things that we can do.
So who's all included in the creative minds coming up with the different
Well,
ideas?
A lot of
and-
creative people.
Yeah.
No, I think similar to last year, it'll be Mike, myself, and Brittany sitting down and looking at, Mike's thematic assessment, and then as we are building our master schedule at the high school and middle school down to the elementary with staffing, which is, a huge part of our budget, then it's what is there still to support some of these themes. And like the teacher study, there were a lot of things we wanted to do, but we couldn't do it all in year one. What is here that's feasible, to Mike's point, that we can digest and make a fiscal decision behind, and then look in future years to expand on that, just like the teacher study as well.
yeah, and I would say the focus group was the starting point for that. One of the things that we asked was, what are things that we can do? What kinds of ideas do you have for how we can change? Some of that is that assessment of other districts and maybe unique things that they're doing that we can easily adopt. That will be the work.
Everything that
Was time an issue with the other districts also that you've talked to?
What's that?
You had highlighted time as being one of the issues
Yeah.
or concerns. Did you see that with the other districts
Well, I
also?
didn't do focus groups with them. They just
Well,
shared
if they
what their
brought it up or-
practices are. But my general sense is that's a theme that would exist elsewhere as well. Yeah, and on both accounts, time off, practices, and overtime and comp time.
I cut you off there before you.
Oh, yeah, you did. Was there anything that you found that surprised you didn't expect?
Well, and not to say that compensation or hourly rates and things like that didn't come up. They did come up, but I was surprised that the dominant theme was, like I said, was time. There's obviously a desire for increased wages. There always is, but what was fairly clear was time is really important to us. on all kinds of levels. Younger, less experienced employees, and then some of our veteran support staff who have, in some cases, many years of experience, were still saying that they valued that and wished that they had some more. So we'll see what we can do.
Any questions?
And I think timeline, I've shared this with a few people. Much like the teacher study, all of those recommendations were really for the new fiscal year, being 7/1 of 25 and the start of the new school year. That's probably the case here as well. If there are things that we see that come out of this that can be changed immediately, maybe we do. But the big picture of it really is about what are we changing for next year? Because that's usually the part that has the budgetary constraints, and that's why we're looking at it the way we are.
Good. Mike?
Michael?
You're using the word time, but I don't know the context. What are you, more hours, more?
I tried to say it. So in two ways. Time in terms of paid time off, so possibly more vacation, more personal days, sick days in some cases. When I think of one particular group, because of the very few hours that they work, they don't get sick days, so time in that sense. And then the other piece of time is things like overtime practices or comp time practices, them reporting to us that in their day-to-day work, when they're at their hourly cutoff, if you will, or their time cutoff, the desire in some instances to work beyond that, the need to, balanced with a supervisor saying, your day is over, you have to be done. There's a lot to that relative to paying for overtime, relative to prolonged hours, qualifying for insurance and things like that. So that's a challenge, kind of from a management perspective, that we're finding our way through. So it's those two pieces.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are addressed in the questions number two, what are the challenges you face on a day-to-day basis? Time comes up quite a bit there. And then number three was what is important to you in regard to compensation and benefits in your position. Time is referenced across all groups pretty much for
Yep.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the staffing update.
Thank you. So we have, as we've done, we've included at the top our current vacancies in regards to teaching staff. The current vacancy that exists is a special ed vacancy at KMS. That's a position that was occupied by a contracted service employee, teacher. That person left us, and we're in the process of finding a replacement. So that could be a contracted teacher. It also could be another teacher from a contracted contracted service. And there are, I don't want to say pros and cons, it all depends on who the employee is. At this point in the year, it's pretty typical for a position like special ed for a contracted service to be the route that we go. We've had some possibilities with some different candidates that we believe we're close on. Not enough that I can give you a name right now or tell you that it's not a vacancy, because it still is.
And again, that was a separation of service, that individual separated service from the agency we were working with.
Correct.
Not specifically
Yeah.
from our schools or anything.
Well,
They left the
they
agency.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
yeah. And then as well, I noted in administrative vacancy, which was kind of interesting to put on paper. Nonetheless, it's there. So, I don't know if you want to speak to.
The position is posted on the WeCan website as well as WASDA's website. We have some applicants and we're keeping it open through this month.
I've received phone calls from some of my HR colleagues, in a few cases, sharing names of people that might be interested, so,
Oh, good.
yeah, it's interesting. And then below that is our support staff and professional technical staff, new employees, and vacancies that exist. That's sort of that ongoing list that has picked up a little bit with the mid-year, but it's mostly, aides, food service people, those kinds of positions that are going in.
Very good. Looks like one of these resignations is in a couple days.
It probably is the case, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, any questions? Nope. We will then move on. Teacher negotiations updates. And this is negotiating the 25-26 calendar year
Correct.
with the GEA.
Right, and the context to this is the beginning of the year, calendar year, January, and even prior in December is a time when we typically start this process, the people who've been part of that process before. It begins typically with GEA reaching out to us for information that they use for the negotiation process relative to a listing of teachers, a listing of salary amounts, so that they're in the know relative to what the pool of money is that we're talking about. Likewise, we communicate with them about, okay, hey, it's that time of year. I noted sort of a timeline of events that sort of summarizes a lot of the things that occur. There's dialogue around, okay, when are we going to meet? A first meeting will get at, things like ground rules, how the process will work, just review, those kinds of things. We reached out on multiple occasions, in particular, as far back as November, via email around the interest in beginning the process. Last year was a year that we completed with a new contract. We're able to start a school year with everyone knowing where they were, was desirable. We heard a lot of positive feedback about that, and had interest in trying to do the same thing, to proactively work to end the year with a clear picture of what the next year would begin. For all kinds of reasons, it's beneficial, relative to the hiring process, relative to teachers just knowing where they're at relative to salary, giving everyone a very clear picture. GEA has expressed, how do I put this? Has made it clear that they are not interested in beginning the process. And it's our understanding that that's a common theme from district to district in the area, and very likely the state, relative to the political environment, specifically of Act 10.
But we have reached out to them already and said, we're ready and willing, and the data that you say they request, be it the salaries and such, we have all that compiled and ready to go.
Yeah,
We've
would.
asked to start the process and it's been denied.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we just kind of are in a holding pattern, waiting to hear back from them.
So we are in a holding pattern, and there's some pieces to this. The consumer price index is now at, what, 2.95, and I believe is that a firm number at this
That's
point?
Yes, that's the 2024,
Right.
25 number.
Right, and when we initially communicated with them, I think it was upwards of over 3,
Yep.
3.1, possibly, I could be wrong on that, but, you know, that difference is real, and it's just a very interesting situation. I've done this process now like 9 times, and both sides have been delayed to the point of, you know, end of the process resulting in retro pay being given the next fall or even mid-year. I think we had one of those instances 2 years ago. And it's not desirable. We should be working very hard to be settled, to be ending the year, beginning a year with everyone knowing where they're at.
I think my first year here was the year it was delayed quite a bit, and we did the retro pay. Last year went very smooth. So what is more the norm? You've been doing it for 9 years. Are we typically ready to go like we were last year, or does it often get delayed?
It often gets delayed. I think Tom and Michael would be able to speak to this. I don't recall a year that we weren't working in arrears, that we haven't started.
I agree. It seems most times we're not going into the school year having the process completed. So last year was kind of a anomaly.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that was intentional. It was an intentional effort on our end
Yeah.
to,
Oh, yeah.
to come to that in May.
Right.
And realistically, even before that.
Yeah.
I feel like that was applauded on both sides to say, you know, that both sides were actually very happy that we were able to come together and do that. So it's kind of unfortunate now that, you know, we've reached out, tried to get the process even started, you know, and that there's a roadblock there because, again, I thought both GEA and the district have both said, you know, how appreciative they were of the process and getting it done early for all of our, and for all the reasons we just mentioned, for the teachers and staff to know what to expect next year. So it's unfortunate.
And I think if you look back a year ago to the last agenda item around compensation study, that was a major theme of I leave the year with my new contract knowing what I'm going to make. And unfortunately, hopefully we can engage in that conversation and negotiation this spring still so that that's viable for all teaching staff because and that's why that's on the agenda tonight, to make that apparent that this is something the district wants to move forward with increased compensation for our staff. But we're unable to do that at this time.
So I guess what is the process then as far as do we keep reaching out or do we, you know, give it some time and then do we have a plan as far as?
Well, simultaneous to the teacher contract negotiations are increases for our other groups, administrators, professional, technical, and support staff. So sort of to part of that response is is that held up or does that begin? Do we move forward with that? I think as well, I don't know that the majority of our teachers are aware of really the timing that this chart represents. I don't think they realize, you know, that we begin this process typically at this time of year. I think that there's sort of an understanding that it's something that happens in the spring. So by the time we get to that point, I think it will, we'll learn more about teachers' desires to kind of proceed or whatever. We'll hear more from our neighboring districts and even throughout the state around kind of what the issue that we're talking about.
Russ?
So you brought up the thought that Act 10 is playing a role in this delay. Where is Act 10 now? And I think I have a general understanding of where it's at. And through a legal process as far as potential repeal.
Well, and Dr. Reuter and I have talked about this some, but it's I don't want to say in a holding pattern, but the next step will be, state Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's been thrown back from the circuit court to legislation. There's been an appeal, so right now it is technically in a holding pattern. We'll see what transpires, as it'll probably be pushed to the state Supreme Court, but probably still not this year, as they go on recess in the month of May, and that would be the fastest case ever at state history to go to the state Supreme Court. So this could be ongoing for,
So if this case were to
Period
make
of
it
time.
before the spring election,
I'm sorry?
if the case makes it to the Supreme Court before this election, we would hear a ruling before they go on break in May.
Correct.
Otherwise, it won't be till after they come back from break,
Which could be
post-election.
next fall, yeah. And we have to remember that courts make decisions, not rules. So it'd
Yeah.
still go back to the legislation to make the rules of what the new rules of post-Act 10 would look like.
So,
Yeah.
given that that's a reality, that's the timeline, and there's nothing us nor the GEA can do about that.
Correct.
I can understand their want to push this back, thinking there's some ruling out there reinstating Act 10 in its full, but that's not the realities of where we're at. It's currently on pause till the state Supreme Court chooses to pick it up as a case.
Right.
I would assume they will. We don't know if they will, or they've indicated that.
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, this, and to Dr. Reuter's point, this represents one sliver of Act 10. The enormity of it is
No, I'm not trying to get into the full,
Yeah.
the totality. I mean more the timeline. So if they're unwilling to move forward until the Act 10 picture is clear, what are we looking at for ensuring staff is compensated
We
correctly
could be looking, still having this conversation a year from now.
for next year?
Correct. So it could be a retro pay that people who do leave the district or have left the district during that time frame would not get an increase, and it's a pause for everyone.
But we're paused for a decision that isn't going to have any ramifications or even be potentially made until next fall sometime.
Correct.
So what do we do between now and then in two parts? One for certified staff, and two, our aides and
Everyone
our
else.
support staff and our administrative staff, because
I think for the certified staff, we continue to reach out to the GEA asking to sit down and have a conversation about this. And then for everyone else, that would be Mr. Nowak and I coming forward with a recommendation for, at a future personnel and or board meeting for, compensation.
we have an idea what that compensation will be.
Yeah, we've
I mean,
we've budgeted for CPI increase.
Okay.
and that's
So-
historically what we've done.
And typically these two mirror.
Correct.
Technically it's three categories of employees mirror each other as far as that percentage goes.
So my understanding is that since I've been here and previous, the general practices until the teachers were settled, all other employees did not receive an increase.
I don't see a need, I don't see a need to hold back all other employees, given the leadership of the GA's unwillingness to come to the table. So we should probably move forward in those regards. You had mentioned that we had budgeted for CPI. CPI as it is, or CPI as it was in December?
We at the time of our budgetary process, the prediction was at 3.1%. But as
So
Mr.
it's-
Nowak said, it landed at 2.95, so that's where we're sitting right
So we
now.
have 1.5,
0.6.
or,
Yeah,
yeah,
point-
sorry, 0.6, my
Yeah.
apologies.
Yep.
Difference, but we've earmarked 3.1.
I believe so. I'd have to 100% verify that with Ms. Allendorf, but that was what we thought going into the annual meeting.
I
and
believe that was the
fall
concessions
budgetary.
during the budget talks,
Yep.
right? So in those regards, has staff been made aware that we were willing to proceed with the 3.1 at full CPI then? And now they've lost?
We haven't made that public because we haven't been able to have a negotiation meeting. But anyone who's
I
read
guess
our
I just-
budget
I
would
g-
know that that's
I
what
guess I
was.
just made it crystal clear.
Yeah, yeah.
For the public at this point. But you would know if you paid attention to the budgetary process, and I'm sure someone in the GA would be monitoring that because it's the first wink and a nod towards what we're thinking in a budgetary
Correct.
allotment for staffing.
Like last year, we budgeted full CPI.
What does this mean for certified staff that are non-union members?
Well, it means they're potentially going to start a school year not knowing how much they're going to be making. Which if you're a union member, that's understood because of the negotiation process. But if you're not,
Is it understood by their general membership right now that that's the track
Oh,
that
they're-
their
we don't
leadership
know.
has now?
We don't, that's their communication. We have a certified union, and so therefore we have to negotiate with the certified union.
Sure.
And we aren't privy to their internal communications with their membership.
Sure. I guess that would be my concern. Because last year, when we had it settled early, we actually heard a lot of positive feedback from general membership of the GEA on that process and the outcome of the process and how impactful it was. Not to mention with the comp study, we heard directly within that how important that was. We worked hard diligently to achieve that last year, and I think we are attempting that same thing this year. And at this point, I'm worried we've earmarked 3.1. We're now down to 295. So they've already lost their membership potential gains in negotiation because they can't, at this point, regardless of where Act 10 is, the state law says they can negotiate up to what CPI is. Is that a correct understanding or assessment of the situation?
Yeah, they can negotiate up to CPI unless the board chooses to exceed that.
Just on the budgetary side, and then I'll kind of back off of this conversation and let somebody else take the floor. When we came up with that 3.1%, was anything in the budgetary process chosen to be omitted, not reviewed, or scaled back as far as expenditures would go in order to ensure that we could meet that 3.1?
No, I think it's the goodwill of your governance as a board and our administrative team to make sure that we're compensating at full CPI moving forward so we can attract and retain quality staff here.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, but that was not my question.
No, nothing was
No,
put
no.
aside.
No, in the budgetary process, right, if we would choose to try to strive for 2% instead of 3.1, right, we would have used that money elsewhere in the budget.
Correct.
So I'm assuming something had to either be reduced or not considered to be implemented or implemented in a smaller fashion in order to make up for that difference.
I think we
We didn't get a
north
3.1% raise, right, in our revenue
Yep.
to pay these people the 3.1%. So that comes out of the budget process somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's about how we prioritize what we're budgeting for and how we
Correct.
look at what is most important, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some things
So we're placing a 3.1%
percent emphasis on our-
increase on their staffing.
Correct.
right, over other items for the district.
Correct.
right. And
We would like to do that.
part of
Yes,
that process
so that we can
was
retract
Be
and
crystal clear on that.
attract and retain quality people. Yes.
Correct.
with our insurance renewing on January 1, part of that process is keeping things like this in mind.
Yep.
So as we talk about insurance, we know, okay, we're earmarking, in this case, 3.1 or whatever amount that is. We have to be conscious of that as we talk about insurance ramifications.
With all things, right? So
As an
any
example.
good budgetary process is what do we prioritize and value as a school district or as an organization? This was one of the priorities to make sure that we can fully implement an increase for all staff at cost of living. Because we heard that loud and clear in the comp study with certified staff.
I guess sitting here and hearing this tonight, I'm disappointed in the process. So we left last year's table with a commitment to each other to continue year-round conversations so we can be better equipped to come to a resolution faster and the first year into that commitment, one of the parties is no longer willing to come to the table at all, not even to discuss. Let's say this doesn't come out as far as Act 10 goes, and we just need to move forward ensuring our staff are compensated correctly and their union membership's compensated correctly. And we can't even have those discussions at this point. To say, regardless of what happens with Act 10, if status quo stays, this is what it could look like. That way, if we get a clearer picture on where Act 10 is, we could either move forward or pivot and adjust based off of those changes. That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
So it's disappointing for all the work that was put in on our end for the leadership of the GEA to then communicate back to us, we're not interested to talk at all.
Well, they're taking a calculated risk, and it's not just the GEA. It sounds like it's unions across the state.
Correct.
So this has kind of gone out there, all taking a calculated risk. I just hope our teachers are having their voices heard by their representatives at the GEA.
Yeah.
Tracy, you have a
Yeah,
comment?
I was just gonna say, I'm still gonna hold out hope that we do start speaking with them sooner rather than later. For many of the points that Mr. Ewert brought up, I was part of that team last year. There was a lot of positivity when we were shaking hands at the end of it all, and I heard quite a bit of positive comments from staff as well as to how things were laid out. And I still have heard just recently how it turned out very well for them, just having that idea. As far as timelines, and Brittany would be able to kind of confirm or tell me I'm completely wrong, but we may have to ultimately take action at some point in December for tax reporting purposes. Because if we're gonna back pay, we can't necessarily carry over into 26. I think it'd be an absolute mess if we carried over past January 1. But you brought up a good point too with the insurance piece. I think there's a lot of moving parts that people aren't necessarily, when we talk about negotiations, obviously salary is kind of at the top of the list, but there's a number of downstream effects that has, whether it's be other staff, whether it be insurance, whether it be all these other things. And so in my mind, it would behoove all of us to at least come together for an initial meeting so that we could lay out, okay, we understand you're not ready to come to the table with an offer, negotiate, or whatever you want to call it, but here's some things to keep in mind so that if someone as part of your union comes to you with these questions, you at least have some information to share with them. And maybe they already know. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and everybody in GEA knows a lot of the things that we've talked about and those downstream effects. But I'm of the opinion we can still meet and talk. If they say we're not ready to do this yet, but we'll still meet and talk, that's still better than nothing at all.
And I think we have made it clear that we're willing to talk and go over possible scenarios, nothing concrete, but to have initial meetings and say, if it goes this way, we could do this and just do the prep work.
We've invited.
Yeah, that's
So, I
been-
mean, we have done everything we can on our side.
We've invited.
We have a table and the door's open. That's been the consistent message. That's the consistent message I've asked these two as part of that negotiating team to bridge that conversation, and
It's,
we're waiting for them to walk in the room.
it's up to their membership then. Put pressure on them if they want them to come negotiate and start the business or not.
Unfortunate.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, we will move on to item 6, unfinished business, of which we have none.
Oh,
Teacher
yeah,
contracts.
Teacher contracts there, D.
There we are, teacher contracts.
We have
Thank you.
Good, ready? We have 2 teacher contracts to bring forward. The first is for Nancy Azevedo, Spanish teacher at the high school. She began the year on a limited term basis for basically first semester. We're now in a position that she has interest in extending that to work second semester, again on a limited term basis. This is a teacher who had recently retired, and there are ramifications with that process that allows her to continue in this role for the remainder of this year. Next year would be a different story, but it's
You
not
mean fall
out
of
question.
2025?
Correct, yeah.
She would not
So
be able to. So.
we're thrilled to have her
Yeah.
stay with us. She's teaching higher levels of Spanish. She's highly experienced, and she's really enjoying it here. All the feedback I get is very, very positive. We're looking to bring that forward to the board, and I'll explain this in a second. The second one is for Lauren Banis, third grade teacher at County Line Elementary, is filling in for an FMLA leave. We kind of went back and forth on this. These are information only. That has been the practice that we didn't even bring these to the committee. And then when we started, it was really for informational purposes, in that the personnel committee is not a group that would forward these to the board. That's why there's no action
recommendation tonight, or-
recommended.
Per policy, they're approved in consent.
Yeah,
I appreciate you still bringing them forward, though.
yeah. And I did include that language of the administration is recommending the approval. That's just carryover language from these backgrounds. If we continue to do it this way, I can modify that piece, but I think you understand the intent here. It's just to share who these individuals are and the fact that there'll be contracts at the next board meeting.
Sounds good. Any questions? All right, now we will move on to item 6, unfinished business, of which we have none. And then item 7,
We have,
I'm sorry, what?
no, we have destination imagination.
Yeah,
That's new
Item
business.
7
Yep.
is destination imagination.
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought you said new business. You said unfinished. Never mind.
we have 2 additional Destination Imagination contracts to bring forward. These were forwarded to us by Sarah Unerdl, the Athletics and Activities Director, to be brought to the board at the next meeting. It's for Maureen Warnemont and Kelsey Myers, each in the amount of under $25. This is in line with the others that have been brought forward and in line with practices in previous years relative to Destination Imagination.
Very good. I will look for a recommendation on this.
A motion with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve the Destination Imagination positions.
Second.
I have Kim with the first, Mr. Pollock with the second. Is there any conversation? No? Hearing none, I'll take a vote on that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. And that motion carries. And with that, that brings us to item 8, final motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I have Tracy with the first and Ms. Higginbotham with the second. Take a vote on that. Any discussion, first of all? Take a vote on it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that brings to close the Personnel Committee at 6:13 PM on January 20th.